Welcome back, guys. We're going to cover section 37.8 today, which is on what happens when the immune system malfunctions. So the first thing I want to talk about is actually what are allergies? Besides just like the seasonal allergies, pollen allergies, like what is an actual allergy? If some of you may have like a peanut allergy. So what actually is that? Allergies are misdirected immune responses. Okay, so your immune system, it's going to react to harmless substances. Okay. So some common allergies, right? Some of you may have these: pollen, mold. Those are definitely the most common. If you are allergic to bee venom, you might go into anaphylactic shock. Milk, eggs, fish, wheat, shellfish in addition to fish, tree nuts, peanuts. Okay, those are all harmless things, but your body for some reason assumes that they are trying to kill you. So it is going to initiate an immune response to try to remove these antigens. Okay. In this case, though, these particular things are called allergens. All right. These are allergy-causing antigens. So they enter the body and begin to bind to allergy antibodies on specific B cells. Okay, so that's actually what an allergy is. So some of you may have this. B cells divide quickly, producing plasma cells that produce antibodies in the bloodstream. So it's just like any other immune response. Antibodies attach to mast cells, mostly in the respiratory and digestive tracts. Mast cells release histamines. This leads to leaky capillaries and other symptoms of inflammation. That's why like you might get like pressure in your nose and your sinuses if you get seasonal allergies. Mine are pretty bad right now with the spring coming into full effect. And then lastly, histamine increases mucus secretion in the respiratory tract. So if you've got seasonal allergies, you definitely know about having a lot of extra mucus in your nose. I've touched on this before, but we're going to go back to real quickly autoimmune diseases. So this is when you have an immune response against the body's own molecules. Normally, the immune system does not make mistakes. It's good at identifying self cells, okay, what it belongs to. Well, there can be something that goes wrong, and then suddenly the immune system begins making anti-self antibodies. So it starts thinking, I need to defend against itself. An autoimmune disease is what happens then, okay? So the immune system attacks a component of one's body. Some types of anemia are autoimmune diseases. Many type 1 diabetics, it starts out as an autoimmune problem. Rheumatoid arthritis, basically your immune system starts attacking your joints. And so this happens to young people. I know you think of arthritis as happening to elderly patients, but rheumatoid arthritis is arthritis that happens to people much younger age, where their immune system starts attacking their joints. So it's incredibly painful. Multiple sclerosis, okay, that one's right, MS. That affects your brain and your nerves. And then lupus can be pretty much anywhere in your body. So that's just some of them. I've got a picture of a list of them on the next slide. There's no cure for an autoimmune disease, but there are some medications to treat the symptoms. And I've already touched on this, but these drugs usually suppress the immune system. So they stop it from attacking the body, right? How do you protect yourself from your immune system attacking your joints with rheumatoid arthritis? Well, you give that person a medication that shuts off their immune system, and then it doesn't attack their joints. Well, the problem is that leaves these individuals more susceptible to infection. Okay, and so people that are going through this sort of stuff, they're more likely to suffer from like this COVID-19 problem, okay, because they've shut their immune system off so that they can try to function as normally as possible with these other conditions. All right. We can also have autoimmune diseases resulting from untreated stuff. So there's an example in your textbook about rheumatic fever. And so we talked about how strep throat is really problematic. If you do not treat it, it can result in what's called rheumatic fever, which is not good. That's bad. That's going to affect the muscles in your heart, and it becomes an autoimmune disease where your immune system starts attacking muscles in your heart and weakens it over time, and that's not ideal. So if you have untreated strep throat, you have about a 1% to like 3% chance of developing this rheumatic fever. So you should always get strep throat treated. Never, ever, ever, okay, ignore that. You don't want to end up with a poor heart in this disease. So here we have a nice diagram. You've seen this picture before of a bunch of different autoimmune diseases. Multiple sclerosis in the brain. Graves' disease is a common thyroid disease. Rheumatoid arthritis is going to affect your joints. You can have muscular dystrophy. Okay, fibromyalgia, psoriasis is a very common one. You see a lot of commercials about medications for psoriasis. Leukemia, multiple sclerosis, okay? And some of you may remember before we left, I told you I'm actually kind of in danger with this whole COVID issue. It's because I have an immune system, an autoimmune problem. Mine is actually this one, ulcerative colitis. So my case is that my body, for some reason, thinks my large intestine is not my own. Okay, and so it starts to attack my large intestine, basically leaving holes and ulcers inside of it. That's why it's called ulcerative colitis. I know it says here ulceratic, but it's ulcerative. And it leaves scars on the inside of your colon. If you don't deal with it over time, that can lead to colon cancer. Right? If you just keep scarring up your colon, you get colon cancer. So I'm on a pretty heavy medication to shut my immune system off to prevent it from doing that. Okay, so that's why, like, we're really trying to look out for some of these people with what we're doing here. I know it's tough to go through what we're doing, but I can certainly appreciate the efforts you guys are going through. So thank you. Okay, so in addition to autoimmune diseases, we can actually have immune deficiency diseases, and these are things that are going to affect your immune system. Okay, autoimmune diseases, we treat them by shutting off the immune system. Immune deficiency diseases just do that themselves. Okay, it's when the body cannot mount an effective immune response. About 1 in 500 people have some type of genetic immune deficiency of some kind. One that you may hear about is SCID, which we'll talk about here in a minute. SCID, severe combined immune deficiency. There's sort of a famous picture of this one, but SCID is about 1 in, I think, 60,000, if I remember the number. And then we also have acquired immune deficiencies arise during a person's lifetime. And these are much more common. So we have like 1 in 500 or so people having some sort of genetic thing, but we can have people having acquired, meaning it wasn't necessarily something genetic, it's something that happened during their life. So anyone who's been through chemotherapy, radiation, immune suppressive drugs, diabetes, leukemia, any sort of pathogenic microbes, most commonly here, HIV, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But these people are also at risk, right, of dying from this coronavirus that we're dealing with right now because they have an acquired immune deficiency, right? They're not able to respond. Okay, so mentioning one of these genetic ones from a minute ago, SCID, it's severe combined immune deficiency. It's about 1 in 60,000 children. There's several genetic defects that cause few or no immune cells to be formed. Okay, and so the sort of the famous picture I was mentioning here, when they, I know you kind of joke about it, but like the bubble children, these children really live in a bubble, because anything that they get after a certain age is pretty much going to kill them. So this is kind of like the famous SCID picture of the child who is actually completely isolated from the world. So, but what happens here? Well, the child might live for a few months, right, if it's not developing immune cells, protected by antibodies received from its mother during pregnancy or breastfeeding. Okay, so there's actually a little bit of transference of antibodies from mother to child, both in utero and through breastfeeding. Okay, but the problem is once these antibodies are lost, or they begin to degrade or break down over time, okay, because they don't last forever. Your immune system keeps replenishing them, but these don't last forever. Common infections can become fatal without an immune response. So this poor individual here, if they got some sort of common cold, would have no way of necessarily fighting it off. Okay. One of the common form of therapy is actually a bone marrow transplant. So if you've ever heard of bone marrow transplants before, part of that is to try to get people's immune systems kicking into gear. And this isn't always effective, but it's one way to try to help these people. So what happens is they take bone marrow from a healthy individual. It used to be an incredibly painful process. They'd actually drill into your bone while you were not, anesthetized or anything. They were just drilling straight into your bone to get some bone marrow out. I don't think they do that anymore. It's a little bit less painful from what I understand, but anyways, the hope is to get enough bone marrow from you, good bone marrow, that you can then give it to this individual here, and that they might be able to make enough immune cells to confer some normal immune responses. Okay. Another one is gene therapy. That's kind of still in the works. It's aiming to insert functional genes into a child's cell. There's some success with this, but gene therapy is still pretty darn expensive. So those are our two ways to try to help these people who have genetic, immune system malfunctions. Okay, so you can get it genetically. You can also get it via acquisition. You can acquire it. And we should definitely talk about this one in our immune system chapter, AIDS. It stands for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. It's caused by a virus, HIV, which is the human immunodeficiency virus, or viruses. So there's actually a category of them, okay? These viruses undermine the immune system by infecting and destroying helper T cells. Okay, that's actually what part of the immune system HIV affects. It affects helper T cells. It infects them and destroys them. So remember, what their job was to stimulate reproduction of B cells in the humoral response and T cells in the cell-mediated response. Okay, so it just ramps up production, right? That was the idea, is that very quickly you get a rise in these B cells and T cells to fight off a disease. Well, if you don't have these T cells, these helper T cells, they never ramp up production, so you can't fight stuff off. Usually AIDS itself doesn't kill someone, okay? So getting HIV isn't necessarily the killer itself. It's almost always some kind of secondary infection that the person's not able to fight off. It's usually something like pneumonia, some sort of serious flu that this person just does not have the ability to fight back, okay? It's usually secondary stuff that kills them, but if they didn't have the AIDS syndrome, right, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, they would probably be able to fend this off. It's estimated there are 37 million people who are HIV positive, and we've had 40 million die since 1981 from AIDS complications. So it's definitely out there. So what does it do? It actually enters helper T cells, okay, the ones that up here we were talking about that were trying to ramp up the production, hijacks the cell's metabolic machinery, forcing it to make more viruses, and then when it emerges, it takes out the coating of the T cell membrane with them. Okay, and you'll see this in the next picture, but basically, as the virus is leaving the cell, okay, and forming new little viruses, it bubbles off here, and it takes with it pieces of the membrane. Okay, so it's going to trick your body into thinking, oh, look, hey, this thing here is a T cell, okay, as it's basically coming off, right? It comes off over here and starts floating around your bloodstream, and it's got markers on it that make it look like a T cell, so kind of problematic. Those who get infected, initial symptoms are fever, rash, muscle aches, headaches, swollen lymph nodes. You're usually not dying from this initial infection, okay? But after several months, the viral replication slows down, and the individual begins to feel a little bit better. They don't necessarily have all of these symptoms here, but they now have ineffective helper T cells, so that's very problematic. So the helper T cells continue to decline in number. Eventually, immune response becomes so weak that it can't overcome routine infections. All right. Here's a picture of, this is a helper T cell in here. Let me change my pin back to white. Okay, this is a helper T cell. All right. And what's coming off here, it's budding off these new HIV, okay, viruses. All right. And the outside of it, looks like it's going to be coated with the helper T cell, okay, plasma membrane. So it tricks your body into thinking that this belongs. All right. Untreated AIDS victims have a life expectancy of about 1 to 2 years. So it's not very long. At some point in the next year or two after you get it, you might encounter something that actually kills you. Okay, notice we say untreated because there is treatment for this now. Several drugs can slow down HIV replication and AIDS. So can't get rid of it, but we can slow it down so that it's not full-blown and you have zero immune response. HIV positive patients can now take just a once-a-day pill. There used to be just like dozens of different pills and medications you'd have to take, but now it's down to just a once-a-day pill and have a normal lifespan to the best that we know about. These types of drugs, though, have only been around for like 15 to 20 years, so we don't know any long-term side effects of people being on these drugs, but we know that they've been able to live a semi-normal life at least, not have to worry about getting infected. But if you are HIV positive or if you are suffering from AIDS, right now the coronavirus is definitely not something you want to come in contact with. Okay. HIV cannot survive long outside of the body. It must be transmitted through direct contact with an infected person's broken skin, mucous membranes, or body fluids. Okay, so you have to come in direct contact with it. So usually how this thing is spread, sexual activity, needle sharing, and blood transfusions are the 3 main ways. Most of it is through unprotected sexual activity, and even with that, it's kind of hard to transmit this disease, but that's the main way that it moves from person to person. And it's also why we should be extremely careful when dealing with blood, right? Cleaning up blood. If anybody, not just necessarily HIV, but if somebody has some sort of infection in their blood, we definitely don't want to be touching that. So that's why we're always very careful as well when we're dealing with blood and cleaning up blood. So, is there a vaccine against HIV? No. HIV is a difficult virus to treat because it has an incredibly high mutation rate. There are many strands of HIV out there in the world, and in fact, a person may have multiple strands within their body, and that's why there used to be, just dozens of pills these people would have to take because they're trying to fend off all these different HIV mutations. HIV is an RNA retrovirus. Okay, so what that means is that when it goes into those helper T cells, okay, its genome becomes permanently part of the host cell's DNA. All right, that's why we're saying that there's not necessarily a cure, but we can try to shut this virus off inside of a person, because once it's in there, it's in there. So what happens is, okay, so this is your HIV molecule. It hits a helper T cell. It injects the RNA, so it's an RNA virus. It doesn't use DNA, it uses RNA. Okay, and it has proteins called integrases in it, which take the viral RNA and integrate it into, right? Notice that it's integrating it into the host cell's DNA. Okay, and then this DNA gets copied. Well, guess what? That DNA is specifically going to keep making more HIV RNA, and that gets repackaged and distributed as new HIV molecules. So that's why it's really problematic, is because it actually becomes a part of the person's DNA. So how do you get rid of that? Anyways, that's all for today. Let me know if you have any questions.